There are places that don't forget you, no matter how many papers you sign to say otherwise. The lake house was one of them. It stood at the edge of Milner's Lake, its wooden deck sagging slightly toward the water, the paint blistered from too many summers. I'd grown up in that house, barefoot on the dock, fishing with my brother, listening to my parents' laughter echo off the water. Back then, it felt eternal. Now it belonged to him. When our parents died, we inherited everything equally. At least, that's what I believed. But grief makes trust easy to steal. My brother Simon had always been the charming one, the one who knew how to smile while the rest of us drowned. He'd called me to his office one afternoon, just weeks after the funeral. I remember the smell of paper and lemon polish, the way his pen rolled between his fingers. "It's just a tax form," he'd said, sliding a page across the desk. "Something to protect the house from probate." I signed without reading. My hand shook from exhaustion, not suspicion. By the time I realized it was a deed transfer, he'd already changed the locks. He sent me a message the next week. "It's better this way. You live in the city now. I'll take care of it." He never mentioned my name when the family gathered by the lake that first summer. Friends told me he'd converted the guest room into a home office, that his wife, Julia, hosted brunches there every weekend. I saw pictures on social media. The same dock, the same view, the same sunsets, just without me. The first time I went back, 2 years later, I did it quietly. I used a booking website and a pseudonym, Nora Glenn. The house was listed as Milner's Retreat, cozy lakeside nostalgia. The irony almost made me laugh. I rented it for 1 week in July. When I arrived, the place looked the same from the outside. The chipped railings, the uneven steps, the rowboat chained to the dock. Inside, though, it smelled different, too clean, too curated. Julia's scent, lavender and white wine, had replaced the warmth of our mother's soap and cedar. Still, my fingerprints were everywhere. The scuff mark on the hallway wall from when Simon and I raced tricycles, the scratch on the mantel from my first art project, the little star carved into the underside of the kitchen table, my secret signature from age 11. He hadn't erased me completely. Not yet. That first summer, I did nothing dramatic. I just existed there. I swam in the lake at dawn, walked barefoot on the deck, left the windows open so the wind could breathe through the rooms again. And every night before I left the house, I moved something small. A family photo turned backward, a drawer slightly ajar, a book from the shelf placed upside down, tiny reminders, invisible to strangers, unsettling to those who think they own a place's peace. When the week ended, I locked the door and left everything as it was, almost. I buried a silver locket, my mother's, under the steps leading to the dock. Not out of sentiment, but ownership. The house still belonged to me in ways that no document could deny. Every summer since, I've returned. Different name, different email, same ritual. The bookings always go through. He never checks. To him, they're just numbers. A rental income, proof of good investment. To me, they're seasons of quiet reclamation. Each year, I take something small, a coaster, a key, a stone from the garden, and leave something behind. A hairpin under a rug, a folded note inside a drawer, a whisper of myself stitched into the silence. He doesn't know I've been there. But the house does, and one day, when the timing feels right, I'll let him see just how well it remembers me. The third summer, I noticed it the moment I stepped inside. A framed photograph had been moved. It used to hang perfectly centered above the fireplace. Simon, Julia, and their son, Michael, smiling on the dock like a magazine family. But now it was crooked, tilted ever so slightly, and the frame's corner was chipped. I hadn't done it, which meant someone else had started to notice that the house was remembering me. By then, renting under new aliases had become second nature. Each summer I returned as someone else, Nora Glenn, Adele Rains, Margaret Shore. A new email, a different credit card, a subtle change in handwriting on the rental form. Simon never looked too closely. Money insulated him from suspicion. He always was careless with details, confident in ownership. That confidence was the first crack I'd learned to widen. I started small, as always, I replaced the vase on the mantel with an identical one, same shape, same color, except for a single detail. Mine had a faint chip near the rim, one only I could recognize, the original. I buried it by the tree line near the dock, beneath a patch of moss. Each act was invisible to the eye but heavy in its intention. This wasn't vandalism. It was reclamation by degrees, a slow undoing disguised as nostalgia. That summer, Julia left a guest journal by the entryway. It was filled with polite notes from renters, beautiful sunsets, so peaceful, the perfect getaway. On the final day of my stay, I added one more. Some houses don't forget who they belong to. Just the initial. Just enough to slip into the subconscious. I closed the book, placed it back on the table, and left the key exactly where I'd found it. By the 4th summer, the house was quieter. Too quiet. I arrived to find a few things missing. The family portrait, the guest journal, one of the deck chairs. But something new waited on the kitchen counter. A note from Simon. Dear guests, please respect the home and its history. We've had some strange incidents. Moved items, misplaced keepsakes. If you notice anything unusual, let us know. The Delaney's, I laughed out loud. So he'd noticed. The cracks were widening. That year, I began to leave reminders in the walls. A slip of paper behind the mirror in the upstairs hallway. You shouldn't have taken what wasn't yours. A hair ribbon tucked into the cushion of the window seat. A single pearl earring dropped behind the dresser in the master bedroom. My mother's. Nothing obvious. Nothing traceable. Just whispers that would make Julia wonder. That would make Simon uneasy in his own home. It worked faster than I expected. In late August, I received an email from the rental site, not addressed to me, but sent to all previous guests of Milner's Retreat. To our valued renters, we regret to inform you that the property is no longer available for booking due to family matters. I smiled. Family matters, the perfect phrase for slow, creeping guilt. But I didn't stop there. In the off-season, when the lake froze over and the town emptied out, I began writing letters. Unsigned, postmarked from neighboring cities. Do you ever hear footsteps in the guest room after midnight? You shouldn't have changed the locks. It didn't make a difference. The house knows. I never mentioned names. Never accusations. Just suggestions. Enough to stain their peace. By the next summer, Simon had installed security cameras. I watched the listings online and noticed the change. Fewer photos, shorter descriptions, shorter stays. The perfect house on the lake was starting to feel haunted. When I returned again, I stayed at a cabin across the shore instead of inside the house itself. From the window, I could see the deck, my deck, where Simon and Julia sat one evening, arguing softly, their gestures tight, their voices sharp even across the water. Julia stormed inside, and Simon remained on the dock, staring out at the lake for a long time, motionless. When he finally looked up, I wondered if he could see me in the distance. The faint glow of my lamp reflected across the water. If he did, he didn't wave. I didn't need to. My revenge had already taken root, not in destruction, but in the quiet erosion of certainty. He would wake in that house every morning, wondering if the sound in the attic was the wind or memory, if the scent of cedar was nostalgia or intrusion. The deed had his name on it, but the house still belonged to me. The summer I stopped renting under aliases was the same summer Simon stopped pretending we were still family. It began with a phone call I didn't answer. He left a message anyway. His voice was the same polished calm he used at work, but something underneath it trembled. Eva, I know you've been here. I don't know what you're trying to do, but it needs to stop. The message ended with silence. Too long. Too careful. As if he hoped I'd hear the sound of his breathing and remember that I was supposed to love him. I didn't call back. I went to the lake anyway. Not to rent, not to hide, just to see. The house looked the same, but it wasn't alive anymore. The flower beds Julia once tended were dead, the shutters sagged, and the dock's wood had grayed from neglect. No more rental listings. No brunches. No perfect family photos. The house had grown tired of pretending. A for sale sign leaned near the driveway, half sunk in the dirt. But I knew Simon. He wouldn't sell unless he had to. The sign was a bluff, a plea for something to change, to reset. I walked the perimeter of the property, just as I used to when I was a child, counting steps, tracing memories. The old oak still stood behind the house, its trunk scarred from where Simon and I carved our initials decades ago. S+E, forever crooked. I ran my hand along the bark and thought about how permanence lies. Inside, through the glass, I saw a figure, Julia. She was standing in the kitchen, staring at a wall. Her hair was unbrushed, her hand clutching a mug. She looked thin, translucent. I recognized that look, the way grief distorts when it's fed by something unspoken. I watched as she set the mug down, turned, and walked toward the back of the house. And then I saw it. The mirror, the same one I'd slipped a note behind years ago. It hung there still, but cracked across the center. My note had found its way through, like a voice pressing against the glass. Later, I learned from a mutual acquaintance that Simon and Julia had separated. She said the house felt wrong, the woman told me, lowering her voice as if the walls could still hear. Doors closing on their own, photos falling, the little boy crying at night. They couldn't stay there anymore. I thanked her politely, hiding the warmth spreading in my chest. Ghosts don't always need to exist to haunt. Sometimes memory is enough. A month later, I visited again, this time in daylight. The property was empty, the sign gone. I walked straight to the dock and sat on the edge, legs dangling over the water. The lake reflected the sky, a still sheet of glass. I could see myself in it, clearer than I ever had before. I took out the deed copy I'd made from my parents' will, creased, faded, but mine, and burned it with a match. The flame curled the edges, the ashes scattering across the surface like gray petals. Ownership, I realized, had never been about paper. It was about presence. Who remembers? Who returns? That night, I slept inside the house again. No aliases, no secrets. The air was colder now, the kind of chill that hums with unfinished stories. I lit a candle on the mantel, opened every window, and let the lake breeze carry through. It was the first time the house didn't resist me, and that's when I found it. A box in the back of the closet, taped shut. Inside, my mother's letters. Dozens of them. Her handwriting filled every page, soft, slanted, intimate. Letters she'd written to me while she was dying, but never sent. Simon had kept them. Hidden them. The betrayal was fresh again, raw and bright. Each word a confession of her worry for me, her love, her hope that Simon and I would find our way back to each other. I sat there for hours reading until the candle burned to wax. And when I finally stood, I knew what my last summer at the lake would be. Not revenge by haunting, not by silence, but by truth. I would give the house its voice back. I came back to the lake one final time in late August. The air was heavy, the sky the color of tin, the smell of rain stitched into every breeze. The house looked older than ever, its roof slightly sagged, its shutters loose, its front steps sinking into the damp soil. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I saw it. Just recognition, like meeting an old version of yourself you've finally learned to forgive. I didn't book the house. There was no listing to hide behind anymore. Instead, I parked by the side of the dirt road and walked the rest of the way, carrying only a duffel bag and a small wooden box. The grass was tall now, the path half swallowed by weeds. A wind had come in from the west, stirring the lake so that the water slapped gently against the dock. Inside, everything was just as Simon and Julia had left it, half lived in, half abandoned. Dust like pollen on the tabletops, the faint smell of damp wood and lavender gone sour. The mirror was still cracked, the fracture cut across my reflection like a scar. I unpacked slowly. From the box, I took out the letters I'd found the year before. My mother's handwriting, soft and steady even when her body had failed her. She had written to me about courage, about patience, about the difference between loss and surrender. I placed one letter in every room, In the kitchen, the bedroom, the hallway, little ghosts of her voice scattered through the house that had forgotten her. In the last envelope, I added a new page. My own words this time. You were right, Mom. Some things return. Some things wait. The house isn't his anymore. It's ours again. That evening, I sat on the dock until sunset. The lake shimmered gold, then bruised into blue. Dragonflies skimmed the surface, and somewhere far off, a loon called once, low and lonely. I thought about Simon, about the boy he'd been, about the man he'd become. I thought about all the small, cruel choices that added up to this silence between us. And for the first time, I didn't want him to suffer. Not anymore. I just wanted him to know. When night fell, I lit a lantern in the living room window, the same kind our parents used when they wanted us home before dark. Its light flickered across the lake, a faint orange heartbeat. Then I dialed Simon's number. He answered on the second ring. His voice was rougher than I remembered. Eva, I'm at the lake, I said. You should come. A pause. The kind of silence that only happens between people who have run out of lies. It's still your house, he said at last. You know that, right? No, I told him. It never was. I hung up. I stayed until morning. At dawn, I walked through the house one last time, opening every window, every door. The curtains lifted in the soft wind, and the smell of the lake rolled through like forgiveness. I didn't burn the house. I didn't destroy it. I simply left it open, let the air take it back. Before I left, I nailed a small wooden sign to the dock. Just one word carved into it. Remember. Years later, I heard the house had been bought by a young couple. They painted the walls, fixed the deck, built a new dock. Sometimes, I imagine them sitting there in the evenings, hearing a whisper through the boards, a laugh carried on the water, the sound of a woman's footsteps pacing softly in the kitchen. Not a haunting, just a presence, a memory that won't fade, no matter who holds the deed. Now, when I dream, I see the lake exactly as it was, the water calm, the air full of the scent of pine and rain. And somewhere in that stillness, I feel my mother's hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. She says nothing. She doesn't have to, because in the end, I didn't reclaim the house. I reclaimed myself,